My parents sued me for the $6 million beach villa I bought with my own money. They stood in front of a judge and claimed it belonged to my unemployed sister because she had a family and I did not. I walked into that courtroom alone without a lawyer. My brother-in-law smirked at me from the plaintiff table, thinking they had already won. But when the judge saw the single document I placed on the bench, their smiles vanished. By the time I walked out, my brother-in-law was leaving in handcuffs, and my parents were facing federal charges. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, I am a risk assessor for venture capital firms. My entire job is calculating the probability of disaster. I spot lies in financial ledgers for a living. Yet somehow I missed the biggest fraud of all, happening right under my own nose. My family. Before I tell you how I destroyed their little scheme, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep who made it out. Let me know in the comments if you think family is defined by blood or by loyalty. It started last Friday. I had just closed a massive merger deal in Chicago, and I was exhausted. I needed silence. I needed the ocean. 6 months ago, I had quietly purchased a modern villa in Malibu. It was my secret sanctuary, a $6 million glass and steel fortress overlooking the Pacific Ocean. I had not told a soul about it, not my friends, and certainly not my parents, Elijah and Patrice, who still believed I was a struggling data entry clerk living in a rented apartment. I drove 3 hours from the airport, dreaming of a hot bath and the sound of waves. But as I turned onto my private driveway, my stomach dropped. The gate was wide open. My heart hammered against my ribs, thinking I was being robbed. I accelerated up the hill and slammed on the brakes. There were 4 cars parked in my driveway. A white Range Rover I did not recognize, a leased BMW convertible, and 2 other sedans blocking my garage. The bass from a sound system was shaking the front floor-to-ceiling windows. I could see shadows dancing inside my living room. Someone was in my house. I grabbed my bag and marched to the front door, my phone in hand, ready to dial 911. I jammed my key into the lock, but it would not turn. I tried again. Nothing. The lock was brand new. Panic turned into cold rage. Someone had changed my locks. I pounded on the heavy oak door. "Open this door right now," I screamed. The door swung open. A man I had never seen before stood there holding a red Solo cup. He looked about 25, wearing a frat house t-shirt, and he looked me up and down with annoyance. "Wrong house, lady, the party is invite only." He slurred and tried to close the door in my face. I shoved the door back with all my strength, catching him off guard. I stepped into the foyer and the smell hit me instantly. Marijuana smoke, stale beer, and expensive perfume. My sanctuary had been turned into a nightclub. There were at least 50 people crowded into my open-concept living room. Muddy footprints trailed across my white Italian marble floors. A girl in a bikini was sitting on my kitchen island, opening a bottle of champagne that I had been saving for my retirement. And then I saw her. Bianca, my younger sister, the golden child, the Instagram life coach with 0 clients and a mountain of credit card debt. She was standing by the fireplace holding court with a group of admiring strangers. She was wearing my silk robe, the vintage one I bought in Paris. "Bianca!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the thumping bass. She turned around, and for a split second I saw terror in her eyes. But just as quickly it was replaced by that familiar, condescending smile she had perfected since childhood. She did not rush over to explain. She did not apologize. She simply waved me over like I was a late guest. "Oh my God, Nia, you actually made it!" she yelled over the music. I marched through the crowd, shoving people aside. "What are you doing here, Bianca? How did you get in here? And why are you wearing my clothes?" Bianca laughed, a tinkling fake sound that made my skin crawl. "Chill out, sis. Mom and Dad said it was okay. They told us you bought this place as a surprise for the family, but you were too busy working to enjoy it. So they gave us the keys. We are just breaking it in for you. It is a housewarming party." My blood ran cold. Mom and Dad. I had never told them about this house. The only way they could have known is if they had opened my mail. Before I could respond, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I spun around to face Chad, Bianca's husband, my brother-in-law, The man who had started 5 businesses in 5 years and bankrupted all of them. He was wearing a linen suit that looked suspiciously like the upholstery from my guest bedroom. Nia, 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 he said, shaking his head like a disappointed teacher. You always have to bring the drama, don't you? Look around. These are important people, potential investors. You should be thanking us. We are networking. This house is finally being put to good use instead of sitting empty while you slave away at your little computer job. I looked at him. I looked at the strangers trashing my home. I looked at the wet ring a beer bottle was leaving on my grand piano. Get out, I said. My voice was low, but it was shaking. Everyone out. Now. Chad chuckled and leaned in close, his breath smelling of my scotch. Actually, Nia, we are not going anywhere. In fact, we were going to talk to you about the master bedroom. Ideally, Bianca and I need the south-facing view for her morning meditation videos. You can take the guest suite downstairs. It is darker, so it will be better for your computer work. The audacity stole the air from my lungs. He was evicting me. In my own house. I looked past him to the coffee table. There, sitting on a stack of Architectural Digest magazines, was my Ming Dynasty vase. I had won it at an auction in London. It was over 300 years old. It was pristine, or it had been. Now it was filled with gray ash and crushed cigarette butts. Someone had used a 300-year-old artifact as an ashtray. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was the quiet, terrifying sound of a bridge collapsing. I did not scream. I did not argue. I walked past Chad. I walked past Bianca, who was pouring another glass of my wine. I picked up the vase. It felt heavy and cold in my hands. Hey, careful with that, Chad called out. That looks expensive. I turned to the massive stereo system blasting techno music in the corner. I did not hesitate. I hurled the heavy porcelain vase directly into the speakers. The crash was deafening. The porcelain exploded, sending shards of ancient pottery and sparks flying across the room. The music died instantly. The silence that followed was heavy and violent. 50 pairs of eyes turned to stare at me. Bianca dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble joining the wreckage of the vase. Get out, I said. And this time I did not whisper. Get out of my house before I burn it down with you inside it. Chad stepped forward, his face turning red. You are crazy. You cannot just kick us out. We have rights. I pulled out my phone. You have exactly 3 minutes before the police arrive. And unlike the last time you called them on me for being loud, I am the name on the deed. Bianca started to cry, the fake theatrical sobbing she used to get out of speeding tickets. You are so selfish, Nia. We are family. How can you embarrass us like this? I looked at the shattered vase on the floor, the symbol of everything I had built, everything I had protected being treated like garbage by the people who were supposed to love me. I am not embarrassed, Bianca, I said, tapping the screen to dial 911. I am just getting started. But I had no idea that while I was dialing, Chad was smiling. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. Go ahead and call them, Nia, he said calmly. But you might want to read this first. According to the state of California, this is not your house anymore. The silence in the room was shattered not by the police sirens I had threatened, but by the sound of a heavy car door slamming in the driveway. Through the open front door, I saw my parents' silver sedan parked haphazardly behind Chad's leased convertible. My stomach dropped faster than it had when I saw the intruders. Dealing with my sister was one thing, but Elijah and Patrice brought a suffocating weight that I had spent my entire adult life trying to escape. My father, Elijah, walked in first wearing his Sunday best suit, even though it was a Tuesday evening. My mother, Patrice, followed close behind, clutching her pearls as she surveyed the scene. She did not look at me. She did not look at the shattered Ming vase on the floor. Her eyes darted immediately to the guests. She was scanning the crowd, noting the expensive watches and the designer handbags of the strangers drinking my champagne. She saw Chad's investors, and a look of panic crossed her face. Nia, put that phone away immediately, my father boomed, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. He marched over to me and slapped my hand down, ending the call before it even connected. "Dad, they broke in!" I hissed, pulling my hand away. "Look at this place. They are trashing it." "Lower your voice," my mother hissed, stepping between me and the guests. She forced a strained smile at a couple standing nearby. "So sorry about this, just a little family misunderstanding. Please enjoy the hors d'oeuvres." She turned on me, her smile vanishing instantly. "Have you lost your mind, Nia? You are embarrassing us in front of Chad's business partners. Do you know who these people are?" I stared at her in disbelief. "I do not care who they are. This is my house. I bought it. I paid for it. And I want them out." Bianca, who had been crying fake tears into a napkin, suddenly perked up. "See, Mom. I told you she would be like this. She is just jealous because Chad has friends and she has nobody." My mother sighed, the sound dripping with disappointment. She reached out and smoothed Bianca's hair, looking at me with that familiar pity that always made me feel small. "Nia, listen to yourself. You are being hysterical. We told Bianca she could use the house. We thought you would be happy to help your sister finally get a leg up in the world. You gave her the keys without asking me," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "That is theft, Mom." "It is not theft. It is family," my father interrupted, crossing his arms. "Since when did you become so stingy? You have that nice apartment in the city near your office. You are barely ever here. Why do you need 5 bedrooms for one person?" "It is selfish, Nia. Purely selfish." I looked around the room. The guests were pretending not to listen, but I could see them exchanging amused glances. The angry black woman trope was playing out in real time, and my parents were the directors. Then my mother stepped closer, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Besides, there is something you do not know. Bianca needs this stability right now. She is fragile. And honestly, we think she might be expecting." I looked at Bianca, who was currently refilling her champagne glass. "She is drinking alcohol, Mom." My mother waved her hand dismissively. "It is just a sip. The point is, she is building a family. She needs the space. A husband, a potential baby, a future. You are single, Nia. You have your career and your little spreadsheets. You do not need a $6 million villa to come home to alone. It is a waste." The words hit me like a physical blow. It was not just about the house. It never was. It was the confirmation that in their eyes my success meant nothing because I did not have a ring on my finger. My hard work was just a resource for them to harvest and give to Bianca. "So here is what is going to happen," my father said, adjusting his tie. "You are going to apologize to Chad for the scene you caused. You are going to drive back to your apartment and let them finish their party. We will discuss a proper visitation schedule later. Maybe you can come down on weekends when they are not busy." I stood there, my nails digging into my palms. They were kicking me out. They were actually kicking me out of the house I had worked 80-hour weeks to afford. "No," I said. My voice was quiet but steady. "Everyone leaves. Now. Or I go to the police station and file charges for trespassing and breaking and entering. And I will name all 3 of you." My father's face turned purple. "You would arrest your own parents, after everything we sacrificed for you." Suddenly Chad stepped forward. He had been watching the exchange with a smug satisfaction, leaning against the marble countertop. He cleared his throat loudly, drawing everyone's attention. "Actually," he said, keeping his voice smooth and calm, "I do not think she can do that, Elijah." Chad opened the leather folder he had been holding. He pulled out a document that looked disturbingly official. He walked over to my parents and handed it to my father, but he was looking directly at me. "You see, Nia?" he said, a smirk playing on his lips. "We anticipated you might be unreasonable. So I spoke to a lawyer friend of mine about something called a constructive trust. Since your parents gave you the money for your education and supported you for years, the law views your assets as family assets. And since we have established residency here by moving our furniture in 3 days ago, you legally cannot evict us without a court order." He tapped the paper with his finger. "So technically this is not your house anymore. It belongs to the family estate. And as the majority vote, The family has decided you are the one who needs to leave. I stared at the document in Chad's hand, feeling the blood drain from my face. It was a drafted complaint, a legal threat printed on heavy bond paper, constructive trust. I repeated the words, tasting like ash in my mouth. Are you serious, Chad? You cannot just invent legal terms to steal my house. Chad laughed, shaking his head as if I were a slow child who failed to understand a simple math problem. I am not inventing anything, Nia. It is a very real legal concept. You see, Elijah and Patrice invested in you. They paid for your braces. They paid for your food for 18 years. They gave you that $5,000 loan for your first car, which you used to get to your internship. That internship led to your career. Therefore, your career and the assets derived from it are fruit of the poisonous tree if you try to cut them out. The house was bought with funds that originated from the family trust. It belongs to the family. My father nodded vigorously, snatching the paper to read it himself. Exactly what I have been saying. We made you Nia. We invested in you when you were nothing. Now that you have hit the jackpot, you think you can just hoard it all. This house is our return on investment. I felt like I was in a fever dream. The logic was so twisted, so insane, that I could not even form an argument. You think paying for my braces 20 years ago gives you ownership of a $6 million property? I paid you back for that car loan 10 years ago, Dad, with interest. I have the bank transfer receipts. Receipts do not matter when the intent was a partnership, my mother chimed in, smoothing her dress. We were partners in your success, Nia. And partners share. Before I could scream, the room was suddenly bathed in red and blue light. The police. Finally. I turned to the door, relief washing over me. Officers. I yelled, waving them in. In here. I want these people removed immediately. 2 officers walked in, their hands resting on their belts. One was older, looking tired, the other young and alert. They surveyed the broken vase, the crying sister, and the crowd of party guests who had gone silent. Who called 911? The older officer asked, his voice flat. I did. I stepped forward, pointing a trembling finger at Chad. I am the owner of this property. These people broke in, changed my locks, and are refusing to leave. I want them arrested for trespassing and vandalism. Look at my floor. Look at my vase. The officer looked at Chad. Is this true, sir? Chad did not look scared. He looked bored. He reached into his jacket pocket again, but this time he did not pull out the legal threat. He pulled out a stack of envelopes. Officer, this is a misunderstanding, Chad said, his voice calm and reasonable. This is a family dispute. We live here. My wife and I have been residents for over a month. My in-laws are here visiting. Naya here is the one who does not live here. She lives in the city. She just showed up tonight drunk and started smashing things because she is having some sort of mental breakdown. Liar, I screamed. He is lying. Check the deed. My name is on the deed. I pulled up the digital deed on my phone, shoving it toward the officer's face. Look. Naya Brooks. Sole owner. The officer looked at the phone, then looked back at Chad. Sir, do you have proof of residency? Chad smiled, a shark-like grin that made my stomach turn. He handed the envelopes to the officer. Here is the electric bill, the water bill, and the internet service agreement. All in my name, Chad Miller, registered to this address. Dates go back 4 weeks. I froze. I stared at the envelopes. How was that possible? I had set up autopay. I had not checked my digital mailbox in a month because I was closing the merger. He must have called the utility companies impersonating a new tenant and transferred service. It was identity theft, but right now in this living room it looked like residency. The officer flipped through the bills. He looked at the deed on my phone, then back at the bills. He let out a long sigh. Ma-am, he said, turning to me. This is a civil matter. Excuse me, I choked out. The officer handed the bills back to Chad. If he has utilities in his name and keys to the property, he has established tenancy. We cannot evict a tenant without a court order. If you want him out, you have to go through the eviction process. That takes 30 to 60 days. But he broke in. I insisted, tears of frustration pricking my eyes. He changed the locks. That is illegal. He says he lives here with family permission, Chad interjected quickly. And your parents here confirm that. My father stepped forward, putting a protective arm around Chad. That is right, officer. We gave him permission. Nia is just unstable. She has been under a lot of stress at work. The officer held up his hand, stopping me from interrupting. Look, folks, I am not a judge. I cannot decide who owns what tonight. But I can decide who is disturbing the peace. Ma and you are the ones screaming and breaking property. He pointed at the shattered vase. Did you break that? He asked. I hesitated. Yes, but it is my vase. It is destruction of property in a shared dwelling, the officer said sternly. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to leave. You are going to cool off. And you can sort this out with your lawyers in the morning. If you stay and keep screaming, I will have to arrest you for disorderly conduct. I looked at the officer, then at my parents. My mother was refusing to make eye contact, pretending to examine a painting. My father was glaring at me, daring me to defy the police. Bianca was smirking behind her champagne glass. And Chad? Chad gave me a little wink. He had won. He had stolen my house in plain sight, and the law was protecting him. I took a deep breath, my hands shaking so hard I had to clench them into fists. Fine, I said, my voice deadly quiet. I will leave. I grabbed my purse. As I walked to the door, passing the people who had betrayed me, I stopped in front of Chad. Enjoy the party, Chad, I whispered, because it is the last expensive thing you will ever enjoy. He laughed. Do not forget to close the gate on your way out, Nia. We do not want any riffraff getting in. I walked out into the cool ocean air. The police watched me until I got into my car. As I drove down the driveway, leaving my $6 million sanctuary behind, I did not cry. The tears were gone. In their place was a cold, hard calculation. They wanted to play legal games. They wanted to talk about money and assets. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had not used in years. Hello, a voice answered on the second ring. It is Nia, I said, staring at the house in my rearview mirror. I need a forensic accountant, and I need a shark. I am going to war. I sat in my car parked just outside the heavy iron gates of my own property. The engine was off, and the coastal fog was rolling in, wrapping around the windows like a cold, suffocating blanket. Through the windshield, I could see the golden glow of my living room. It looked like a lantern in the darkness, warm and inviting. I could see shadows moving back and forth against the glass. They were dancing. That was my sanctuary. I had picked out every piece of furniture, every light fixture. I had negotiated the price of that marble kitchen island for 3 weeks. And now my sister was likely spilling cheap beer all over it while my parents laughed at how easily they had disposed of me. I watched as the delivery driver for a pizza place pulled up to the gate. I watched as Chad walked out to meet him, paying with a credit card that I realized with a jolt of nausea was probably mine. I had left my purse on the kitchen counter in the chaos. My phone buzzed against the center console. The screen lit up the dark car with a harsh white light. It was a text from Bianca. I stared at the words, and for a moment I actually forgot how to breathe. Don't be selfish, sis, the message read, followed by a heart emoji. You are rich anyway, so just think of this as a late wedding gift. Mom and Dad agree that it is better if the deed is transferred to us for tax reasons. We will take good care of it. Love you. Love you. She stole my home, humiliated me in front of strangers, and kicked me out into the cold. And she ended it with love you. That was the moment the last shred of familial guilt evaporated from my body. I did not cry. I did not scream. I felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the cold, clinical calm I felt when I was analyzing a failing company right before I advised the board to liquidate it. They thought this was about a house. They thought this was a sisterly squabble. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I was not just Nia, the quiet daughter. I was Nia Brooks, the senior risk assessor for one of the largest venture capital firms in the country. My entire career was built on finding the rot hidden beneath the surface of shiny, successful companies. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my laptop bag. I tethered the connection to my phone and opened the computer. The blue light of the screen reflected in my eyes, replacing the warm glow of the house I had lost. Chad wanted to talk about the law. He wanted to talk about assets and liabilities. Well, that just happened to be my specialty. I did not go to law school, but I had spent 10 years tracking down money for billionaires. I knew how to follow a paper trail better than any private investigator. I bypassed the public search engines. I went straight to the credit bureaus and the risk assessment databases my firm subscribed to. I typed in his name, Chad Miller, social security number ending in 4592. I had memorized it from the utility bill he waved in my face just 30 minutes ago. The screen loaded, and then it turned red. Deep crimson red. Chad Miller was not a successful entrepreneur. He was a financial corpse walking. I scrolled through the report, my eyes scanning the data faster than I could process the anger. 6 maxed-out credit cards, a repossessed boat in Florida, a default on a small business loan in Nevada, and the BMW convertible sitting in my driveway. It was not leased. It was a rental, and it was 3 weeks overdue for return. But that was not the worst part. I dug deeper, looking for the source of his recent cash flow, the money he was using to throw this party. I found a series of peculiar transactions linked to a shell company registered in Delaware. It looked like a classic Ponzi scheme structure. He was taking money from new investors to pay off old debts, trying to keep his head above water. And then I saw it. The connection. The reason he was so desperate for my house. There was a lien filed against him by a private lending group. A group that did not use banks or lawyers, but used threats and high interest rates. He owed them $250,000, and the deadline was next week. He did not want my house to live in. He wanted my house to leverage as collateral. He needed a tangible asset to show these dangerous men to buy himself more time. My parents were not helping Bianca build a family. They were helping a con artist secure a multi-million-dollar asset to pay off loan sharks. I looked up at the house again. I could see Chad standing in the window raising a glass of champagne. He looked so confident, so smug. He thought he had outsmarted the quiet sister. He thought the constructive trust document was his shield. I closed my laptop. A smile touched my lips, but it did not reach my eyes. You want to play by the rules of finance, Chad? Fine. Let us see how you handle a full audit. I put the car in gear and drove away into the fog. I had nowhere to sleep tonight, but that did not matter. I had the one thing better than a bed. I had the truth. And I was going to use it to bury him. For 3 days I lived out of a suitcase in a hotel room downtown. I went to work early and stayed late, burying myself in market analysis and risk projections. The office was my fortress. Here on the 42nd floor overlooking the city skyline, I was not the ungrateful daughter or the black sheep. I was a respected senior analyst. I controlled millions of dollars in capital. I was untouchable, or so I thought. Wednesday afternoon started like any other. I was in the middle of a conference call with a tech startup in Silicon Valley when my assistant buzzed in. Her voice sounded strange, tight. She told me there was a man here to see me and that he refused to leave until he saw me face to face. Before I could ask who it was, the glass door to my office swung open. A man in a rumpled suit walked in, holding a thick manila envelope. He did not look like a client. He looked like bad news. Nia Brooks, he asked, not waiting for an answer. He tossed the envelope onto my mahogany desk right on top of my quarterly reports. You have been served. He turned and walked out before I could say a word. My colleagues were staring through the glass walls. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. I ended the conference call with a trembling finger and picked up the envelope. It was heavy. My name was typed on the front in bold black letters. I ripped it open and pulled out a stack of legal documents. The header at the top made the room spin. Superior Court of California. Plaintiffs Elijah and Patrice Brooks. Defendant Nia Brooks. It was a lawsuit, a quiet title action. They were not just threatening to take the house anymore, they had actually filed the paperwork to strip me of my ownership. My hands shook as I turned the pages scanning the legal jargon. I expected to see the arguments about the constructive trust Chad had mentioned. I expected to see claims about implied contracts. But I was not prepared for paragraph 4. The words jumped out at me like a physical slap. Complaint for damages. Count 1 financial elder abuse. I stopped breathing. Elder abuse. In the state of California, that was a serious criminal accusation. It was the kind of charge reserved for caregivers who stole from dementia patients. I read on my stomach, churning with bile. The complaint alleged that I had manipulated my elderly and vulnerable parents into liquidating their life savings to purchase the Malibu property. It claimed that I had promised them a home for their retirement, only to cruelly evict them once the deed was in my name. It claimed the $6 million did not come from my investment portfolio, but from a secret cash stash my father had supposedly been saving for 40 years. It was a lie. A grotesque, evil lie. My parents did not have a life savings. I had been paying their health insurance premiums for 5 years. I paid off their credit card debt twice. The only financial abuse happening was them bleeding me dry. But looking at these typed pages, it looked real. It looked damning. To a judge who did not know us, I looked like a monster who had defrauded her own aging parents. This was Chad's doing. I knew it. He knew he could not win on the constructive trust argument alone because he had no proof of funds. So he decided to destroy my character instead. He was gambling that I would be so terrified of the public shame, so afraid of being branded an elder abuser that I would settle. He wanted me to sign the house over just to make the lawsuit go away. I slammed the paperwork down on my desk. I was about to call my lawyer when my office phone rang. The sharp, shrill sound made me jump. I looked at the caller ID. It was the managing partner, my boss. I picked up the phone, trying to steady my voice. "Hello, Marcus?" Nia, the voice on the other end, was ice cold. There was none of the usual warmth, none of the camaraderie. "We just received a package via courier. It contained a copy of a civil complaint filed against you regarding financial fraud and elder abuse." My heart stopped. They had sent it to my employer. Of course they had. It was the ultimate leverage. "Marcus, please let me explain," I stammered. "That is a personal family matter. It is completely fabricated. My brother-in-law is trying to extort me." "Nia, stop," Marcus cut me off. "You know the policy. We manage billions of dollars for our clients. Our reputation is built on absolute trust and integrity. We cannot have a senior risk assessor who is being sued for financial fraud against her own parents. It is a liability we cannot accept." The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of my desk to keep from falling. "What are you saying, Marcus?" "I am saying that effective immediately, you are placed on unpaid administrative leave pending the outcome of this litigation. You need to pack your things. Security will escort you out of the building." The line went dead. I sat there holding the receiver, staring at the panoramic view of the city I had conquered. In the span of 10 minutes, I had lost my home, my reputation, and now my career. Chad had not just come for the house. He had come for my life. He wanted to break me so completely that I would have no choice but to crawl back to the family and beg for mercy. I looked down at the lawsuit again, at the lies typed on crisp white paper. They thought this would break me. They thought taking away my job would make me desperate. They thought I would surrender. Slowly, I put the receiver back in the cradle. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I did not pack my personal items. I did not take the picture of my family off my desk. I left it there, face down. I walked out of my office past the staring colleagues and the whispering assistants. I walked into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. They wanted a villain. They wanted to paint me as the ruthless daughter who cared more about money than family. Fine. If they wanted a villain, I would give them one. I was done playing defense. I was done being the victim. As the elevator doors closed, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the private investigator again. Find everything I said into the phone. Not just on Chad. On my parents, too. Dig into their bankruptcy filings from the 90s. Dig into every tax return. I want to know every lie they have told for the last 30 years. And get me a meeting with the district attorney. You are going to report your own parents, the investigator asked. No, I said, watching the floor numbers count down. I am going to nuke them. I thought losing my career was the bottom of the barrel, but I was wrong. Rock Bottom has a basement, and my sister was broadcasting live from it. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating so violently against the hotel nightstand that it sounded like a drill. I had 300 new notifications. They were not from colleagues offering support, and they were not from recruiters. They were from strangers. I unlocked my screen and saw a link that had been forwarded to me by an old high school friend with the caption, asking if this was true. I clicked the link and my stomach turned over. It was a recording of an Instagram live stream that Bianca had hosted the night before. She was sitting in my living room wearing my cashmere sweater, the one I had bought to celebrate my promotion. She had set up a ring light and her makeup was done to look tragic, with just enough mascara smudged under her eyes to suggest she had been crying for hours. "Hey guys," she whispered into the camera, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "I did not want to do this, but I do not have a choice anymore. My family is in crisis. My big sister Nia, the one we were all so proud of, has done something unthinkable. She used her fancy finance knowledge to trick our parents out of their retirement fund. She took their life savings, promised to buy them a retirement home, and then put the deed in her own name. Now she is trying to evict them. She is trying to throw our elderly parents onto the street." I watched in horror as the viewer count on the replay climbed into the thousands. Bianca wiped a tear from her cheek. "We are just asking for prayers, guys. And if you can donate to the legal fund link in bio to help us fight this injustice, we would appreciate it. Mom and Dad are devastated. They worked their whole lives for that money." I scrolled down to the comments. They were a firing squad. People who did not know me were calling me a monster. They called me ungrateful. They called me a predator. But the comments that hurt the most were the ones from people I knew. The church community. My parents were deacons at the First Baptist Church of Fairfield. They were pillars of the community. And right there in the comment section were the women from the choir. Sister Gable wrote that she always knew Nia had a cold spirit. Deacon Jones commented that money is the root of all evil and I had lost my soul. They were not asking for my side of the story. They were taking the word of a failed influencer and two known liars as gospel truth. My reputation was being dismantled pixel by pixel. I threw the phone across the bed. They were monetizing my destruction. Bianca was using a link in her bio to raise money for a legal fund that I knew would go straight into Chad's gambling debts. A heavy knock at the hotel room door made me jump. I wiped my face and checked the peephole, expecting to see another process server or maybe a reporter. Instead, I saw a familiar face. It was Pastor Jenkins. I opened the door. He was wearing his black clergy suit, holding a Bible in one hand and a foil-covered dish in the other. For a second, I felt a wave of relief. Pastor Jenkins had known me since I was 5. He had baptized me. Surely he was here to pray with me to ask for the truth. "May I come in, Nia?" he asked, his voice low and grave. I stepped aside. He placed the dish on the small table. "Your mother made mac and cheese," he said. "She is worried about you, Nia. Even after everything, she is worried you are not eating." The manipulation was so thick I could choke on it. My mother did not send food because she loved me. She sent the pastor as an envoy because she knew I respected the church. "I am eating fine, Pastor," I said, crossing my arms. "Did you see the video?" He sighed heavily, sitting down on the edge of the stiff hotel chair. "I did. The whole congregation has seen it. Nia, the church is hurting. Your parents are hurting. The Bible says, 'Honor thy father and thy mother so that your days may be long upon the earth.' You are shortening your days with this anger." I stared at him. "Anger? You think this is just anger? Pastor, they stole my house. They lied to the court. Bianca is lying to thousands of people right now saying I stole their retirement. You know my parents' finances. You know they filed for bankruptcy in the 90s. You know they do not have a retirement fund because I have been paying their bills for 5 years. Pastor Jenkins held up a hand to stop me. Nia, we are not here to talk about ledgers and accounts. We are here to talk about peace. Your father called me this morning. He is willing to forgive you. He is willing to drop the lawsuit. I laughed a harsh, dry sound. He is willing to forgive me for what? For owning property. He wants to restore the family. Pastor Jenkins continued reaching into his jacket pocket. He handed me a folded document. It was a quitclaim deed, a legal form to transfer property ownership. If you sign the house over to Bianca just on paper to help her husband secure his business loan, your parents will drop the case, he said softly. You are a wealthy woman, Nia. You can buy another house. But you cannot buy another family. Be the bigger person. Do it for the sake of your soul. I looked at the deed. Then I looked at the man of God sitting in front of me. He was asking me to enable a fraudster to keep the peace. He was asking me to fund Chad's gambling addiction because my parents were too proud to admit they had bet on the wrong horse. I stood up. The respect I had held for him since childhood evaporated. Pastor, I want to ask you a question, I said, my voice steady. Did Chad tell you that he owes $200,000 to loan sharks? Did he tell you that this business loan is actually a desperate attempt to avoid having his legs broken? The pastor blinked, surprised. I am sure that is not true, Naya. Chad is a fine young man. He recently tithed a significant amount to the building fund. Of course he did. He bribed the church with money he stole from me. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Get out, Pastor. Nia, you are making a mistake, he warned, standing up. The church cannot support a member who sues her own parents. You will be ostracized. I am not the one stealing, I said, pointing to the hallway. And if you want to take sides, go ahead. But when the police come to arrest Chad for fraud, make sure you are not standing too close to him. I would hate for the diocese to find out you were laundering money for a con artist. His face went pale. He clutched his Bible and walked out without another word. I slammed the door and locked it. I was alone, no job, no church, no family. But as I looked at the quitclaim deed he had left on the table, I realized something. They were desperate. Sending the pastor was a Hail Mary. They needed that house signed over now, which meant Chad was running out of time. I picked up my phone and called the private investigator. I don't care what it costs, I said. I want the name of the loan shark Chad owes money to, and I want to know exactly when the deadline is. 2 days later, I sat in a red vinyl booth at a diner on the edge of town. It was neutral ground, far away from the country club, crowds my parents were trying to impress, and far away from the villa they had stolen. I had a thick black binder sitting on the sticky table in front of me. Inside were 5 years of bank statements, wire transfers, and canceled checks. It was the undeniable proof that I had not stolen their retirement money because I was the one funding their lifestyle. I checked my watch. They were 10 minutes late. Just as I was about to leave, the front door chimed, and Elijah and Patrice walked in. My father was wearing his church suit, and my mother had her hair done in that stiff, immovable style she preferred. They looked around the diner with open disdain before sliding into the booth opposite me. There were no hugs, no hellos. My mother simply wiped the table with a napkin before putting her elbows down. Make it quick, Nia, my father said, not even picking up the menu. We have a meeting with the estate planner this afternoon to discuss the Malibu property. The arrogance took my breath away. They were already planning how to divide up my house before a judge had even ruled. I did not scream. I simply opened the binder and spun it around so they could face the numbers. Look at page 1. I said, my voice steady. That is the $40,000 transfer I sent when Mom needed her hip surgery. Turn the page. That is the $18,000 I paid to the IRS when you got audited in 2019. Keep going. the car payments, the insurance, the credit card payoffs. I tapped the paper hard. You are suing me for financial abuse, claiming I stole your savings. But these numbers prove that for the last half-decade, I have been your savings account. If we go to court, this is what the judge will see. And you will go to prison for filing a false police report and perjury. I watched my father's eyes scan the rows of numbers. I waited for the shame. I waited for the realization that he had gone too far. Instead, he let out a short, sharp laugh. He reached out his hand, grabbed the page I was pointing to, and ripped it out of the binder. Then he crumpled it into a ball and dropped it into his half-empty water glass. You think this matters? He sneered, pointing a wet finger at me. You think because you wrote a few checks you own us. Who changed your diapers, Nia? Who paid for your food for 18 years? Who put a roof over your head so you could study for those fancy exams? I paid you back for all of that. Dad, I argued, my voice rising. You can never pay us back. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. You are our child. You are an investment. We poured our lives into you so that when you made it, you would lift the family up, not hoard it all like a dragon. That money you gave us was not charity, Nia. It was rent. It was interest on the loan of your life. And now that you have hit the big time with this house, you think you can cut us out. My mother chimed in, her voice dripping with that poisonous sweetness. It is really ugly to count pennies with family, Nia. We raised you better than that. Bianca needs this start. Why are you so determined to ruin her happiness? I stared at them. They truly believed it. They believed that because they birthed me, they owned every dollar I would ever earn. It was not love. It was ownership. I was about to respond, to tell them that I would see them in hell before I signed over the deed, when a shadow fell over the table. I looked up and felt the blood drain from my face. Chad slid into the booth next to me, trapping me against the wall. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. Hello, Nia, he said, flashing that white shark smile. I was just in the neighborhood. Elijah told me you wanted to have a little chat. I did not invite you, I said, trying to slide away from him, but he blocked the exit. We are a package deal now, Chad said, reaching over and taking a French fry from my plate. Besides, I thought you might want some career advice. I heard about the suspension at work. Tough break. I went cold. How did you know that? Chad shrugged. People talk. Or maybe I made a few calls. You know, looking out for the integrity of the financial sector. He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper so my parents could not hear the venom in his tone. Here is the reality, Naya. You are suspended, but you still have your license. You can still work in this industry eventually. But if this lawsuit drags on, if I have to go to the depositions and testify about how unstable you are, how you manipulated your senile parents, well, the state licensing board takes those things very seriously. He was threatening my certification, my CPA license, the foundation of my entire life. Walk away, Chad hissed, using a phrase he must have looked up just to mock me, but then he switched back to English. Walk away, Nia. Sign the house over to Bianca as a gift. We will drop the lawsuit. Your company will reinstate you once the legal threat is gone. You get your job back, we get the house. Everyone wins. I looked at my parents. They were watching Chad with pride, like he was a strong leader handling a difficult business negotiation. They did not care that he was blackmailing their daughter. I looked at Chad. I saw the desperation behind his eyes. He needed this house. He needed it bad. And he was terrified that I would keep fighting. I gathered my binder. I did not look at my father. I did not look at my mother. I looked straight at Chad. You are right, I said, picking up my purse. I should be worried about my license, but you should be worried about your math. I shoved past him hard enough to knock his shoulder back. Because you miscalculated one thing, Chad. I do not care about the job anymore. I only care about the truth. I walked out of the diner, leaving them in the booth. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. Chad had just made a fatal error. He thought threatening my livelihood would make me retreat. But he forgot the first rule of risk assessment. When the potential loss is total, you do not negotiate. You attack. I drove straight from the diner to a quiet coffee shop in an industrial park on the edge of the city. It was the kind of place that did not serve oat milk lattes or avocado toast, which made it the perfect office for Vince. Vince was a former forensic accountant for the FBI who had gone private 5 years ago. We had worked together on a case involving a tech CEO embezzling millions, and since then he was the only person I trusted to dig through digital trash. When I slid into the seat across from him, he did not say hello. He simply pushed a thick manila envelope across the scratched wooden table. He looked tired, the kind of tired that comes from staring at the ugliest parts of human nature for too long. "You are not going to like this, Nia," he said, his voice gravelly and low. "Your brother-in-law is not just a failure, he is a catastrophe waiting to happen." I opened the folder. My eyes immediately went into work mode, scanning the columns of data as if I were auditing a company. But this was not a company. It was the financial autopsy of a desperate man. "First, let us talk about his businesses," Vince said, pointing to a flowchart he had created. "Prestige Capital, Miller Global Holdings, Future Tech Ventures. They are all ghosts. No employees, no revenue. Just shell companies registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. The only money moving through them is loans. He takes a loan from Bank A to pay the interest on a loan from Bank B." I flipped the page. I saw the credit card statements. He had 18 credit cards, all maxed out. But it was the transaction history that made my blood run cold. "Crypto," I whispered, looking at the transfers to obscure exchanges. "He bet the house," Vince corrected. "Literally. He put nearly $400,000 into a meme coin 6 months ago. He convinced his investors, which I assume means your parents, that it was a sure thing. The coin crashed 3 weeks later. He lost 90% of the value in 4 hours. My parents. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That was where their money had gone. They had not just given him permission to stay in my house. They had likely given him access to whatever liquid cash they had left, believing he was an investment genius who would make them rich. "It gets worse," Vince said. "He is not just broke, Nia. He is underwater with the wrong kind of people." Vince pulled out a series of photographs taken with a long-range lens. They were grainy but clear enough. The first one showed Chad standing in the parking lot of a bowling alley. He looked sweaty, disheveled. He was arguing with a man who was wearing a leather jacket and had a neck tattoo visible even from a distance. In the next photo, the man had Chad by the collar of his expensive linen suit, pushing him up against a brick wall. Chad looked terrified. He was pleading, his hands raised in surrender. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the man. "His name is Silas. Looking for his money," Vince said. "He is an enforcer for a private lending ring, operating out of the darker corners of the city. They do not report to credit bureaus, and they do not send collection letters. They break fingers." I stared at the image of my arrogant brother-in-law looking like a frightened child. "Chad borrowed $250,000 from them to cover his crypto losses," Vince explained. "The VIG is 20% a week. He has missed 3 payments. Silas gave him a deadline. He has to pay the full principal plus interest by next Friday, or things get physical." Everything suddenly clicked into place. The desperation, the housewarming party to establish residency, the constructive trust lawsuit, the attempt to blackmail me into signing the deed over. Chad did not want my house because he admired the architecture. He did not want it for Bianca's meditation room. He needed an asset. He needed a $6 million piece of collateral to show Silas. He needed to prove he had equity so they would not break his legs. He was going to use my home, my sanctuary, as a shield against the consequences of his own stupidity. And my parents were helping him do it, probably thinking they were securing their retirement. "He is going to lien the property," I said, realizing the plan. "If I sign that deed over, he will take a hard money loan against the house immediately to pay off Silas. And when he defaults on that loan, because he defaults on everything, the hard money lender will foreclose. I lose the house. My parents lose everything. And Chad walks away. Exactly, Vince said, leaning back. He is drowning, Nia, and he decided the only way to save himself was to pull you down with him. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling, but this time it was not from rage. It was from the thrill of the kill. For days I had felt helpless. I had felt like the victim of a senseless family betrayal. But now I saw the board clearly. Chad was not a powerful adversary. He was a cornered rat, and rats make mistakes. Can you get me the date of the deadline, I asked? The exact date he has to pay Silas. Vince nodded. Next Friday at noon. Why? Because I said, standing up and tucking the folder under my arm. I am not going to stop him. I am going to let him think he has won. I want him to walk into that courtroom thinking the house is his. I want him to feel safe. And then I am going to introduce him to the one thing scarier than a loan shark. I pulled out my phone and looked at the date. Me. Thursday morning arrived with a suffocating gray mist that matched the cold calculation settling in my chest. I was sitting in the hotel lobby nursing a black coffee and watching the clock tick toward the deadline. I knew Chad was running out of time. Vince had told me the loan shark Silas expected his money by noon on Friday. That gave Chad less than 24 hours to conjure $250,000 out of thin air. I expected him to panic. I expected him to beg my parents for more cash, or perhaps try to sell the jewelry he had stolen from me. But I did not expect him to be so stupidly bold. My phone rang at 9 in the morning. The caller ID displayed a number I did not recognize, but the area code was local. I picked it up expecting another reporter, or perhaps my mother calling to scream at me again. Ms. Brooks, a professional male voice asked. This is David from Apex Private Lending. I am calling to verify the wire instructions on the expedited equity loan application we received yesterday. We are rushing this through per your husband's request, but the routing number on the form seemed to be missing a digit. I froze. The coffee cup stopped halfway to my mouth. My husband, David, I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. I do not have a husband, and I did not apply for a loan. There was a long pause on the other end. The sound of typing filled the silence. I see, David said slowly, his tone shifting from customer service politeness to suspicion. Well, Ms. Brooks, I have a signed application here for a $500,000 hard money loan against the property at the Malibu address. It is co-signed by a Mr. Chad Miller, who is listed as your spouse and co-owner. The signature looks like yours. It is notarized. My blood turned to ice. He had not just claimed he lived there. He had forged my signature. He had forged a marriage certificate. And he had found a crooked notary to stamp it. He was trying to drain $500,000 of equity out of my house before the court date. He was trying to cash out and run. I am looking at the document right now, David continued. If this is fraudulent, Ms. Brooks, I need to flag this immediately. We will cancel the application and notify the authorities. My instinct was to scream, yes. Cancel it. Send the police to arrest him right now. I opened my mouth to give the order. I wanted to hear the sirens. I wanted to see Chad dragged out of my house in cuffs within the hour. But then I stopped. I thought about the timeline. If I canceled the loan now, Chad would know immediately. He would know the gig was up. He would panic. He might run. He might destroy the house out of spite before the police could get there. Or worse, he might manipulate my parents into giving him whatever liquid cash they had left, claiming it was a bank error. If I stopped him now, he was just a desperate man who tried and failed. But if I let him continue, if I let him believe he had succeeded. I thought about the court hearing scheduled for tomorrow morning, the same day as his deadline with the loan shark. If Chad thought the money was coming, he would walk into that courtroom feeling invincible. He would be arrogant. He would be sloppy. And most importantly, he would be on record committing federal wire fraud. Attempting a crime was one thing, executing it was another. I did not want to slap his wrist. I wanted to bury him under the prison. I took a deep breath. I channeled every ounce of my corporate experience, every negotiation tactic I had ever learned. David, I said, my voice dropping an octave. Listen to me very carefully. Do not cancel the application. Excuse me, the loan officer asked, confused. You just said it was fraudulent. I know what I said, but I am asking you to pause. I work in risk assessment for a major venture capital firm. I know you record these calls, so let the record show that I am aware of this application. I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes narrowing as I stared at the wall. Here is what you are going to do, David. You are going to call Chad back. You are going to tell him the routing number issue is fixed. You are going to tell him the loan is conditionally approved. Tell him the funds will be wired tomorrow at noon, right after he brings the final signed hard copies to the closing agent. But Ms. Brooks, why would you want us to lie to him? David asked. Because I need him to feel safe, I whispered. I need him to walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning believing he has won. I need him to think that money is as good as his. If you cancel it now, he runs. If you play along, he stays. And when he stays, I catch him. There was silence on the line. I could hear David breathing. I was asking him to participate in a sting operation without a badge. Ms. Brooks, this is highly irregular, he said finally. But if you are willing to verify your identity and send me a notarized affidavit stating you are authorizing this delay strategy, I can hold the file in pending status until tomorrow noon. But no money leaves our account. No money leaves, I agreed. Just hope. Give him hope, David. Give him so much hope that he hangs himself with it. We hung up. I sat back in the chair and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was a gamble. A massive, dangerous gamble. I was allowing a criminal to hold a gun to my financial head and betting that I could dodge the bullet at the last second. But as I imagined Chad's face when he got that call, when he heard the words approved, the relief he would feel, the arrogance that would return, he would think he had pulled off the perfect heist. He would think he was smarter than me, smarter than the bank, smarter than the law. He would walk into court tomorrow not as a defendant, but as a conqueror. And that was exactly when I would strike. I opened my laptop and typed a quick email to Vince. He took the bait. Get the camera crew ready. We are going to court. Friday morning arrived with the oppressive atmosphere of a funeral. I walked into the law offices of Sterling and Associates located in a glass tower just a few blocks from my former workplace. This was the deposition. It was the pre-trial interrogation where lawyers try to intimidate you into confessing or slipping up before the real court date. Usually a defendant would bring their own legal team to shield them. I walked in with nothing but a bottle of water and a trembling hand that I had practiced in the mirror for an hour. The conference room was freezing. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Arthur Sterling. He was Chad's lawyer. He was a man who cost $600 an hour and wore a suit that cost more than my first car. Next to him sat Chad. My brother-in-law looked like he had already won the lottery. He was leaning back in his chair, playing with a gold pen, looking at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. Please state your name for the record, Sterling said, signaling the videographer to begin recording. Nia Brooks, I said quietly, keeping my eyes lowered to the table. Sterling wasted no time. He opened a thick file folder and slid a piece of paper across the table toward me. It was a copy of my W-2 form from 5 years ago when I was a junior analyst. Ms. Brooks, according to your employment records, your base salary is substantial, but certainly not enough to accumulate a $2 million cash down payment for a Malibu beachfront property in such a short time. Is that correct? I picked up the water bottle. I let my hand shake just enough for the water to slosh inside. I took a long, slow sip, buying time and selling the performance. I have had good years, I said, my voice sounding thin and unsure. Bonuses. Investments. Sterling smiled. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb stumble. Investments, he repeated. We subpoenaed your primary brokerage accounts, Ms. Brooks. The ones listed under your social security number. They show a healthy balance but nowhere near $2 million in liquid cash. So I ask you again under penalty of perjury, where did the money come from? I looked at Chad. He raised his eyebrows, challenging me. I looked back at Sterling. I bit my lip. I manage my money carefully, I stammered. I have other resources. Other resources, Sterling pounced on the word like a predator. By resources, do you mean the family funds? The funds your parents Elijah and Patrice Brooks entrusted to you over the years. The funds meant for the entire family benefit. I looked down at my lap. I picked at a loose thread on my skirt. My parents have given me money in the past, yes? I whispered. Chad let out a loud, audible snort of laughter. Sterling held up a hand to silence him, but his eyes were gleaming. Let the record show the witness admits to receiving funds from the plaintiffs, Sterling said for the camera. Now, Ms. Brooks, did you or did you not use those family resources to facilitate the purchase of the property in question? This was the trap. If I said yes, I was admitting to the constructive trust. If I said no, and they found my hidden accounts later, I would be committing perjury. But I knew something they did not. I knew exactly how they defined resources. I used the capital that was available to me. I said, giving a non-answer that sounded like a confession. I did what I thought was best for the future. Sterling leaned back satisfied. He looked at Chad and gave a subtle nod. They had what they wanted. They had a video of me looking guilty, evasive, and admitting that I used available capital. In their minds, I was a cornered amateur, trying to hide the fact that I had raided the family piggy bank. They did not ask about the offshore holding company. They did not ask about the tech IPO shares held in a blind trust. They stopped digging because they hit the first rock and thought it was gold. The deposition dragged on for another hour. Sterling hammered me on my relationship with my sister. He asked if I was jealous of her marriage. He asked if I felt excluded from the family. I answered with short, broken sentences, letting them paint the picture of a lonely, bitter woman who stole money to buy the love she could not earn. By the time the videographer set off the record, I looked physically drained. I slumped in my chair, staring at the empty water bottle. Chad stood up, buttoning his jacket. He did not even look at me as he walked out the door, probably heading to a celebratory lunch with my parents. But Sterling stayed behind. He packed his expensive leather briefcase slowly. Then he walked around the table and stood next to my chair. He smelled of expensive cologne and arrogance. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, intended just for me. "Ms. Brooks," he said softly. "I have been doing this for 30 years. I know a guilty conscience when I see one. You are drowning." I looked up at him, keeping my expression fearful. "You are going to lose tomorrow," Sterling continued. "The judge will see this video and he will strip you of that house. And then he will refer you to the district attorney for criminal fraud charges. You will go to prison, Nia." He placed a business card on the table in front of me. "My clients are generous people. They are family. Sign the settlement agreement by 5 o'clock today. Give them the house and they will drop the fraud claims. You can walk away with your freedom and whatever little dignity you have left. Do not be a fool." He patted the table twice, a condescending gesture of finality, and walked out, leaving me alone in the cold conference room. I waited until the heavy door clicked shut. I waited until the sound of his footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I picked up the business card. I looked at the embossed gold lettering. I sat up straight. The slump in my shoulders vanished. The tremble in my hands disappeared. I took a deep breath of the stale air and smiled. "You are right, Mr. Sterling," I whispered to the empty room. "Someone is going to prison." I tore the business card in half and dropped it in the trash can on my way out. The performance was over. The trap was set. Now it was time to spring it. The camera swung around to face the other side of the mahogany table where Chad was now sitting in the hot seat. He looked entirely too comfortable for a man who was technically under investigation for financial fraud, even if he did not know it yet. He adjusted his silk tie and winked at the court reporter. He treated the deposition not as a legal proceeding, but as a press conference for his own brilliance. Mr. Sterling, his lawyer, looked bored. He was already checking his watch, clearly thinking this was a waste of time. After all, they had just spent 2 hours grilling me, and in their minds, I had crumbled. They expected me to be too emotional to ask coherent questions. They expected the angry, grieving sister. I shuffled my papers, making a show of being disorganized. I dropped a pen. I apologized. I looked small. Mr. Miller. I began, my voice trembling slightly. You stated in your affidavit that my purchase of the Malibu property was funded by family resources. I just want to be clear, because I am confused. When you say resources, do you mean stocks, bonds, or wire transfers? Chad leaned forward, his smile dripping with condescension. He looked at me like I was a toddler trying to understand calculus. Nia. It was cash, he said slowly, articulating every syllable. You know how your father is. He does not trust banks. He has been saving cash for 40 years. In the safe. In the mattress. Whatever you want to call it. It was a cash transaction. I looked down at my notepad and wrote the word cash in big block letters. Okay, I said, sounding unsure. So you are saying my parents, Elijah and Patrice, gave me $2 million in physical currency to make the down payment? Correct, Chad said, looking at his fingernails. And did you see this transfer happen? I asked, looking up with wide, innocent eyes. Or did they just tell you about it? Because if you did not see it, that would be hearsay, right? Chad scoffed. He looked at Sterling, who gave a slight nod, indicating he should answer. I saw it, Nia, Chad said, his voice hardening. I was there. It was at the house last Thanksgiving. After dinner, your father brought out the bag. A brown leather duffel bag. I watched him count it. I watched him hand it to you. And I heard you promise that you would buy the house for the family trust. My heart was hammering against my ribs, but I kept my face blank. He was adding details. Beautiful, specific, verifiable details. A brown leather bag. Thanksgiving. I paused, pretending to be thinking. $2 million is a lot of bills, Chad, I said softly. That would be heavy. Are you sure it was $2 million? I am a businessman. Nia, Chad snapped, losing his patience. I know what money looks like. I counted the stacks myself. It was exactly $2 million in $100 bills, your parents' life savings, the money they worked their fingers to the bone for, and you took it with a smile. I looked at the videographer, ensuring the red light was still blinking. Every word Chad was speaking was being recorded in high definition. Every lie was being etched into a permanent record. So just to be absolutely clear for the record, I said, my voice steadying just a fraction. You are swearing under oath, under penalty of perjury, that on Thanksgiving of last year, you personally witnessed Elijah and Patrice Brooks possess and transfer $2 million in cash to me. I swear it, Chad said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. I saw it with my own eyes. It is the truth. Sterling tapped the table. Okay, Ms. Brooks, I think we have established the source of funds. Do you have any relevant questions, or are we done here? I looked at Chad. He was smirking. He thought he had nailed the coffin shut. He thought that by claiming it was cash, he had closed the loop because cash is hard to trace. He thought he was protecting the lie. But he had just walked into the trap. Because I knew something Chad did not. I knew about the bankruptcy filing from last year. I knew that my parents had sworn to a federal bankruptcy court that they had less than $5,000 in total assets. If they had $2 million in a bag, then they had committed federal bankruptcy fraud. And if they did not have the money, then Chad was committing perjury right now. There was no middle ground. There was no way out. He had just tied himself to a felony anchor and thrown it overboard. I have no further questions, I said, closing my notebook. I looked at Chad one last time. The smirk was still there, plastered on his face. He had no idea that the words he just spoke were not a testimony. They were a suicide note. I stood up and gathered my things. As I walked out, I did not look defeated anymore. I felt the weight of the evidence in my bag. It was heavy. heavy enough to crush them all. The deposition should have been the end of it for the day. But my mother was not a woman who could sit still when she felt her control slipping away. I sat in my darkened hotel room, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. My security app had pinged me 5 minutes ago, alerting me to motion at my old apartment in the city. It was the apartment I had lived in for 7 years, the one they thought was my only home. I had not been there in a week, but my mother still had a spare key. I watched in silence as Patrice Brooks stormed into my living room. She was not the composed church lady who sang in the choir. She looked unhinged. She was pacing back and forth, muttering to herself, kicking at my furniture. She was looking for something. She went straight to the bookshelf where I kept the few sentimental items I owned. She pulled down the photo albums. These were not digital files. They were the old sticky pages filled with Polaroids from the 90s. She ripped them open. I watched her hands, those same hands that used to braid my hair, tear the photographs in half one by one. She did not rip up the pictures of herself or my father. She only destroyed the ones of me. Baby pictures. Graduation photos. The picture of me accepting my first award at the firm. She was systematically erasing my existence from the family history. Then she found the shadow box. It was a glass case holding my high school valedictorian ribbon, and the dried rose from the only time my father had ever bought me flowers for my birthday. I saw her pause. For a second, just a fraction of a second, I thought she might stop. I thought she might remember the little girl who looked up to her. But then she looked directly at the security camera mounted on the bookshelf. She knew it was there. She knew I was watching. Her eyes were cold, dead things. She lifted the shadow box high above her head and smashed it onto the hardwood floor. Glass shattered everywhere. She ground her heel into the dried rose, turning it into dust. "You think you are better than us?" she screamed at the camera, her voice tinny and distorted through the small speaker. "You think because you have money you can look down on your sister. You are nothing, Nia. You are a cold, heartless machine. You do not deserve this success, and you certainly do not deserve to be my child." The words hung in the air of my hotel room, heavy and suffocating. "You do not deserve to be my child." She was not just angry about a house. She hated me. She hated that I had escaped. She hated that I did not need her anymore. She was destroying my past because she could not control my future. She went to the kitchen and grabbed a bottle of red wine from the counter. She uncorked it and walked over to my white sofa, the first piece of expensive furniture I had ever bought for myself. She poured the entire bottle over the cushions, watching the red stains spread like blood. "I hope you are watching," she hissed at the lens. "I hope you see this. This is what you have done to this family. You destroyed us, so I am destroying you." She dropped the empty bottle on the rug and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the camera shook on its mount. I sat there for a long time, watching the empty, ruined apartment. The red wine was dripping from the sofa onto the floor. The glass from the shadow box glittered in the afternoon light. I waited for the tears. I waited for the heartbreak. I expected to feel that familiar crushing weight of rejection that had haunted me for 32 years. But it never came. Instead, I felt a sudden, terrifying clarity. The last tether was cut. The final biological instinct to protect my mother, to save face for the family, to keep the peace, was gone. She had stomped it into the floor along with that dried rose. She had freed me. I closed the laptop. I did not call the police to report the vandalism. That was too small. That was too petty. I reached for my phone and dialed the number for my lead attorney. Not the one handling the defense, but the one I had kept on retainer for the offensive strategy. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Hello, Nia?" "It is time," I said, my voice flat and void of any emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once we file this motion, there is no going back. This will trigger a federal audit of their entire financial history. It will expose everything back to 1995. I looked at the black screen of my laptop where my mother had just disowned me. "They are not my parents anymore," I said. They are hostile combatants. Activate Plan B. File the motion for the forensic audit and attach the bankruptcy fraud evidence to the docket, and send a copy to the district attorney immediately. Understood. We will file within the hour. I hung up the phone. My mother wanted to talk about what I deserved. She was right. I did not deserve her cruelty. But she was about to get exactly what she deserved. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the buildings. Tomorrow was the court date. Tomorrow I would look her in the eye, not as her daughter, but as the woman who was about to take everything she had left. And for the first time in my life, I was going to sleep soundly. Saturday morning arrived with the heavy gray sky that often hangs over the city before a storm. I was sitting in my lawyer's conference room, surrounded by takeout coffee cups and stacks of legal briefs when the courier arrived. He dropped a heavy box on the table labeled Supplemental Evidence Plaintiffs Exhibit G. My lawyer opened it and pulled out a black leather-bound notebook. It looked old. The cover was scuffed, and the corners were worn down as if it had been carried in a pocket for decades. "This is it," my lawyer said, sliding the book toward me. "This is their smoking gun. Your father claims this is his personal ledger, a diary of every cash transaction he has made for the last 20 years. I opened the book. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear but from anticipation. I turned to the first page marked 1998. In my father's handwriting, it listed groceries, gas, and a line item that said $50 for Nia's piano lesson. I turned another page to 2005. There was an entry for $500 for Nia's prom dress. I flipped to the end, the most recent entries, and there it was, November 23, 2023, Thanksgiving. The entry was written in bold, confident letters. $2 million cash withdrawn from private safe, given to Nia Brooks for purchase of Malibu property to be held in trust for the family. I stared at the page. Then I did something that made my lawyer jump. I licked my thumb and pressed it hard against the date written on the page. I held it there for 10 seconds and then pulled it away. A faint blue smudge of ink came away on my skin. I looked at my lawyer and laughed, a cold, mirthless sound that echoed off the glass walls. "This ink is not dry," I said, holding up my thumb. "He wrote this yesterday, maybe 2 days ago." He went out and bought an old-looking notebook, probably from an antique store or a flea market, to give it authenticity. But he used a modern gel pen. My lawyer leaned in, examining the page. "You are right. The paper is old, but the ink sits on top of the fiber. It has not oxidized. And look at the handwriting. It is too consistent. A man does not write exactly the same way when he is 40 as he does when he is 60. There is no tremor, no change in pressure." He sat down and wrote 20 years of fake history in one afternoon. But that was not all. Beneath the notebook was a sworn affidavit, a witness statement. I picked it up and read the name. Thomas Henderson. I felt a wave of nausea. Mr. Henderson was my father's old drinking buddy from the neighborhood. He was a man who had borrowed money from everyone on the block, including me. I had paid for his cataract surgery 3 years ago because he had no insurance, and now here was his signature swearing, under penalty of perjury, that he was present on Thanksgiving and saw the brown bag full of cash being handed to me. "They bought him," I whispered. "They promised him a cut. Or maybe Chad promised to double his money in some crypto scheme." My lawyer shook his head. "This is reckless. They are not just lying anymore, Nia. They are manufacturing evidence. This is tampering. If we prove this is a forgery, they go to prison, not just for a few months, for years." I looked at the fake ledger. I imagined my father sitting at his kitchen table, his hand cramping as he furiously wrote out lies about piano lessons and prom dresses, trying to retroactively build a narrative where he was the provider and I was the leech. He was writing a fiction where he was the hero, and he was willing to go to jail to publish it. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a text message. I knew who it was before I even looked. Chad. I picked up the phone. The message was short. "See," he wrote. They are willing to die for me. They are willing to rot in a cell just to make sure I win. You have money, Naya, but you do not have loyalty. You cannot beat love. I stared at the screen. Love. He called this love. He thought that manipulating two elderly people into committing felonies was a sign of affection. He thought that turning a father against his daughter was a victory. I showed the phone to my lawyer. He thinks he has won, I said quietly. He thinks because they are willing to jump off a cliff for him that I should be scared. My lawyer looked at the text and then back at the smudged ink on the ledger. He is right about one thing, my lawyer said, closing the evidence box. They are willing to go to prison for him, and on Monday morning, we are going to grant their wish. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city streets. I did not feel sad anymore. I did not feel the sting of betrayal. I felt the cold, hard resolve of a surgeon preparing to cut out a tumor. Chad was right. I could not beat that kind of twisted, toxic love. I could not reason with it. I could not buy it off. But I could prosecute it. I turned back to the room. Send the notebook to the forensic lab, I ordered. I want carbon dating on the ink. I want an expert to testify that this book was written yesterday. And subpoena Mr. Henderson. I want to ask him under oath exactly how much his integrity costs these days. My lawyer nodded, already typing on his laptop. I looked at Chad's text one last time before deleting it. You are wrong, Chad, I whispered to the empty air. That is not love. That is a hostage situation. And I am the rescue team. Sunday night arrived with a suffocating heaviness that pressed against the windows of my hotel room. The city outside was alive with lights and traffic, but inside it felt like a waiting room for an execution. I sat at the small desk, my laptop casting a pale blue glow across my face. On the bed lay my suit for tomorrow. Navy blue, sharp, intimidating. It was not just clothing, it was armor. Next to it was the briefcase containing the forensic report on the ink and the bankruptcy files, the nuclear codes that would incinerate my parents' lives. I looked at the clock. It was 9 in the evening. In 12 hours I would be standing in a courtroom. In 12 hours I would be asking a judge to send my father to prison. My lawyer had told me to sleep. He said the case was ironclad. He said we had the smoking gun. But as I stared at the cursor blinking on my screen, a wave of nausea rolled over me. These were the people who had raised me. Elijah had taught me how to ride a bike. Patrice had nursed me through chickenpox. Yes, they were toxic. Yes, they were thieves. But sending them to federal prison was a bell that could not be unrung. Once I played this card, their lives as they knew them were over. I decided to offer them one last lifeline. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed to know that I had done everything possible to stop the train before the crash. I typed their email address. The subject line was stark and simple. Final opportunity to withdraw. I did not write a long emotional letter. I did not appeal to their love because I knew that account was overdrawn. I appealed to their fear. Dear Mom and Dad. I typed, my fingers moving slowly. I know about the notebook. I know when it was written. I know about the bankruptcy filing from last year. If you walk into that courtroom tomorrow, you are walking into a felony charge. Chad is using you. He is using your reputation to cover his debts. Please, do not do this. Withdraw the lawsuit by 8 in the morning and I will seal the evidence. I will not report the fraud. You can keep your freedom. You can keep your dignity. Just let me go. I attached a single PDF to the email. It was not the full forensic report. It was just a screenshot of the ink analysis summary, which stated clearly that the ink on the page dated 2023 was less than 48 hours old. It was a warning shot. A glare across the bow. I hit send. The swoosh sound of the email leaving my outbox seemed to echo in the silence. Then I waited. I paced the small room. 10 minutes passed, then 20. My email tracker pinged. They had opened it. They were reading it right now. I imagined them sitting in my living room, probably huddled around Chad's laptop. I imagined my father seeing the ink analysis. I imagined the color draining from his face as he realized I knew. I waited for the phone to ring. I waited for my mother to call weeping, apologizing, begging for a way out. I was ready to answer. I was ready to negotiate a surrender. But the phone did not ring. The silence stretched on, becoming more painful than any screaming match. 30 minutes, an hour. They knew I had them. They knew I held their fate in my hands, and yet they were not calling. At 10:30 my phone finally buzzed. I lunged for it, my heart hammering against my ribs. But the name on the screen was not Elijah. It was not Patrice, it was Bianca, of course. They were too cowardly to face me themselves. They were hiding behind the golden child. They were letting the sister I had protected my whole life deliver the final blow. I opened the message. It was not a plea for mercy, it was a picture. It was a selfie taken in my kitchen. Bianca was in the foreground holding a glass of my expensive vintage champagne. She was winking at the camera. In the background I could see my parents. They were sitting at the island, laughing. Chad was standing behind them, his hand resting possessively on my father's shoulder. They looked happy. They looked triumphant. They looked like a family that had successfully purged the one member who did not fit. Below the picture was a text message that made my blood run cold. Nice try with the Photoshop skills, Nia. Chad told us you would try to scare us with fake documents. Dad says he knows what he wrote and he knows the truth. We are not afraid of your little threats anymore. You are just desperate because you know you lost. Save your emails for your lawyer. See you in court, loser. I stared at the image. Chad had spun it. He had convinced them that my forensic evidence was a forgery. He had gaslit them so completely that they were looking at the truth and calling it a lie. He had turned my mercy into a joke. I looked at my father's laughing face in the background. He was raising a glass to my destruction. He was celebrating the theft of my home. He was willing to risk prison because he trusted a con artist more than he trusted his own daughter. Something inside me finally broke. But it was not a break that caused pain. It was the snapping of a chain. The heavy burden of guilt, of obligation, of trying to be the good daughter, fell away. I felt light. I felt cold. I felt dangerous. I did not reply. There was nothing left to say. Words were useless now. They wanted a villain. They wanted a fight. They wanted to see who was stronger. I deleted the message. I walked over to the desk and closed the laptop. The screen went black, cutting off the image of their celebration. You want a war? I whispered to the empty room. Fine. You got one. I walked to the closet and ran my hand over the fabric of my navy suit. I checked the briefcase one last time, ensuring the real evidence was secure. I turned off the lights and laid down in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I was not Nia the daughter anymore. I was not the sister. I was the plaintiff. And tomorrow, I was going to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Let the games begin. Monday morning arrived with the sterile, cold atmosphere of the Superior Court. The room smelled of floor wax and old wood, and the air was thick with the tension of lives about to be dismantled. I sat at the defendant table alone, except for my attorney, who was busy arranging our exhibits with the precision of a surgeon preparing instruments. Across the aisle, the plaintiff table looked like a family reunion. My parents were dressed in their Sunday best. My father wore a navy suit that was slightly too large for him, giving him the appearance of a frail, harmless old man. My mother wore a pale blue dress and a cardigan, clutching a handkerchief, as if she were attending a funeral. And sitting between them was Chad. He was not looking at me. He was leaning forward, whispering to their expensive lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looking every inch the concerned son-in-law, protecting his elders. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Vance entered. He was an older man with silver hair and a stern face, the kind of judge who valued tradition and family values above all else. My heart sank slightly. This was exactly the kind of audience Chad had banked on. Mr. Sterling stood up to deliver his opening statement. He did not walk to the podium. Instead, he stood right next to my parents, placing a protective hand on my father's shoulder. "Your Honor," Sterling began, his voice rich and emotive, filling the quiet courtroom. "This case is not about complex statutes or corporate loopholes. It is about a promise. It is about the sacred covenant between parents and a child. Elijah and Patrice Brooks are simple, hard-working people. They are not sophisticated investors. They do not trust banks. They trust blood. For 40 years, they scrimped and saved, putting every spare dollar into a literal nest egg, a cash savings kept safe in their home intended for their twilight years." He paused, walking slowly toward the jury box, even though there was no jury today. He was performing for the judge. Last year, they entrusted that entire life savings, $2 million in cash, to their eldest daughter, Nia. They did not ask for a contract. They did not ask for a receipt. Why would they? She is their daughter. They believed in the bond of family. They believed that when she used that money to purchase the property in Malibu, she was securing a future for all of them, just as she promised. Sterling turned and pointed a finger at me, his face twisted into a mask of righteous indignation. But they were wrong. Nia Brooks took their sacrifice, and she twisted it into her own personal empire. She took the deed in her own name. And when her parents asked to move in when her pregnant sister needed a roof over her head, she evicted them. She threw them out on the street like unwanted tenants. This is not just a property dispute, Your Honor. This is financial elder abuse of the most grotesque kind. It is a daughter devouring the parents who fed her. I sat perfectly still, my face a mask of stone. I could feel the eyes of the court clerk on me. I could feel the judgment radiating from the gallery. Sterling was good. He was painting a picture that made perfect sense to anyone who did not know the truth. The greedy corporate shark versus the saintly parents. Then came the testimony. My mother took the stand first. She walked slowly, leaning on the railing as if she could barely hold herself up. When Sterling asked her about the day she gave me the money, she began to weep. It was a quiet, dignified weeping that was far more effective than loud sobbing. "We just wanted to help her," Patrice whispered, wiping her eyes. "She seemed so lonely. We thought if we bought the house we could all be together again. I never thought she would do this. I never thought she would hate us this much." Judge Vance leaned forward, offering her a tissue from his own desk. I saw the look in his eyes. It was pity. Pure, unadulterated pity. He looked from my weeping mother to me, and his expression hardened into disgust. He saw a cold, unfeeling woman who had dragged her crying mother into a courtroom over money. My father followed. He was less emotional but more firm. He spoke about the notebook. He spoke about the cash. He looked the judge in the eye and lied with the conviction of a man who had convinced himself it was the truth. I handed her the bag my father stated. $2 million. She looked me in the eye and said, "Thank you, Daddy. I will take care of us." When the plaintiffs rested their case, the room felt heavy with my apparent guilt. Chad was leaning back in his chair, a smug smile playing on his lips. He knew they were winning. He knew the judge was already writing the verdict in his head. Judge Vance cleared his throat and turned his gaze toward me. It was a withering glare. He looked over his glasses, tapping his pen against the bench. "Ms. Brooks," the judge said, his voice sharp and impatient, "I have heard enough testimony to paint a very clear picture of what happened here. The court takes allegations of elder abuse extremely seriously. The evidence presented by your parents is compelling, and your refusal to settle this matter privately speaks volumes about your character." He paused, looking at the clock. "I am inclined to rule in favor of the plaintiffs and issue an immediate order to transfer the title to the family trust. Furthermore, I am considering referring this matter to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Before I issue my ruling, do you have anything to say in your defense, or are you ready to accept the consequences of your actions?" The room went silent. My mother sniffled loudly into her tissue. Chad unbuttoned his jacket, ready to stand up and celebrate. They thought it was over. They thought I was cowed. I stood up slowly. I picked up my heavy briefcase and placed it on the table with a dull thud. I looked at my parents. I looked at Chad. And then I looked at the judge. "I do not want to make a statement, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the emotional fog they had created. "I want to present evidence, and I would like to call my first witness." The judge sighed, clearly annoyed. "Who could you possibly call that would change the fact that you stole your parents' money?" I opened the briefcase and pulled out the report on the ink dating. "I call Mr. James Mitchell," I said, "the forensic document examiner who analyzed the ledger my father just swore he wrote 20 years ago." The smile on Chad's face flickered and died. The air in the room shifted instantly. And after that I continued staring directly at my father. "I will be submitting into evidence the federal bankruptcy filings from Elijah and Patrice Brooks, dated 6 months ago. Because I am confused, Your Honor. Either they lied to the federal government about being broke, or they are lying to you about having $2 million. Which felony would you like to discuss first?" The word felony hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. The judge blinked rapidly, looking from me to my parents, who had suddenly gone very still. My father was gripping the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He knew what a bankruptcy fraud charge meant. It meant federal prison. It meant the end of his reputation. But I was not done. I did not just want to prove they were criminals. I wanted to prove they were irrelevant. "I call Mr. Jonathan Hayes to the stand," I said, turning to the bailiff. The doors opened and a man in a sharp gray suit walked in carrying a briefcase. The air in the room shifted instantly. My parents looked confused. They did not know this man. Chad frowned, leaning over to whisper frantically to his lawyer, but Mr. Sterling shook his head. He did not know who this was either. Jonathan took the stand and swore the oath. He adjusted his glasses and looked at me with a professional nod. "Please state your name and occupation for the record," I said, walking toward the witness box. "Jonathan Hayes. I am the Chief Financial Officer for Stratos Tech, a cloud computing firm based in San Francisco. And what is your relationship to the defendant, Nia Brooks?" "Ms. Brooks is one of our original angel investors," Jonathan stated clearly, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "She provided the seed capital for our Series A funding round 5 years ago. Currently, she serves as a silent partner and holds a 15% equity stake in the company." I saw the judge raise an eyebrow. This was not the narrative of the struggling data entry clerk my parents had painted. "Mr. Hayes," I asked, handing him a document, "can you tell the court what Ms. Brooks' total compensation was for the last fiscal year, including dividends and profit sharing?" Jonathan opened the folder in front of him. He ran his finger down the spreadsheet. "For the fiscal year ending in 2023, Ms. Brooks received a total distribution of $1,540,000. A gasp went through the courtroom. It started from the gallery where the few spectators were sitting and rippled forward. Even the court reporter paused her typing. I watched the judge. His jaw had tightened. He looked from the witness to me, seeing me for the first time not as a victim or a thief, but as a powerhouse. "And just to be clear," I continued, my voice rising slightly, "did Ms. Brooks ever request a cash loan from her parents to fund her lifestyle?" Jonathan laughed. It was a dry professional chuckle. "No. Ms. Brooks is one of our most liquid assets. In fact, she often extends bridge loans to the company during expansion phases. The idea that she would need a loan from anyone is frankly absurd." I turned slowly to face the plaintiff table. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I wanted to see the realization hit them. I wanted to see them understand that while they were fighting over crumbs, I had owned the bakery the whole time. Chad looked sick. His face was a mask of pure terror. He was doing the math. He realized that he had tried to swindle a woman who could buy and sell him 10 times over. He realized he was fighting a shark in her own ocean. But my parents' reaction was different, and it chilled me to the bone. My mother had stopped crying. The tissue she had been dabbing at her eyes was lowered to her lap. She was staring at me, but the hatred was gone. The disdain was gone. In its place was a hunger so naked and raw it made my stomach turn. She was looking at me the way a wolf looks at a wounded deer. My father was no longer gripping the table in anger. He was leaning forward, his lips parted slightly. I could see his eyes darting back and forth, calculating. 1.5 million a year. They were not ashamed that they had lied. They were not horrified that they had tried to send their successful daughter to jail. They were realizing that they had set their sights too low. They had sued for a $6 million house when they could have been guilt-tripping me for a share of a multi-million-dollar annual income. The greed radiating off them was palpable. It filled the room like a noxious gas. For 30 years they had ignored me because they thought I had nothing to offer. Now suddenly I was their favorite child again. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter. I was the golden goose. I turned back to the judge, my heart hardening into diamond. "Your Honor," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "My parents claim they gave me a bag of cash because I was desperate. Mr. Hayes has just proven that I make more in a month than they have saved in their entire lives. The motive for their lie is simple: greed. And now I would like to address the perjury. Your Honor, regarding the alleged $2 million in cash my parents claim to have given me, I have one final piece of evidence to submit." I walked back to my table and picked up the thickest folder in my briefcase. It was bound in a red cover, the color used for federal documents. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the shallow breathing of my mother, who was beginning to realize that the atmosphere had shifted against her. I approached the bench and placed the document directly in front of Judge Vance. "This is a certified copy of a Chapter 7 bankruptcy petition filed in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Central District of California." I stated, my voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "The date of filing is November 12th of last year. That is exactly 11 days before the Thanksgiving dinner, where my father claims he handed me a bag containing $2 million. The judge opened the file. I heard the crisp sound of the pages turning. He adjusted his glasses and leaned in closer, his brow furrowing as he read the lines I had highlighted in yellow. I turned to face the courtroom, addressing my parents directly for the first time. On page 4 of this federal document, under the section titled Schedule A/B Property, the debtor is required to list all assets including cash on hand, safe deposit boxes, and hidden valuables. I pointed to the document in the judge's hand. "Can you read for the court what was listed on line item 15? The judge looked up, his eyes cold and hard. "0, he read. "It says cash on hand 0, and on line item 17 regarding safe deposit boxes." None, the judge read again. "And finally, Your Honor, what was the total value of assets claimed by Elijah and Patrice Brooks to justify discharging over $80,000 in consumer credit card debt?" $4,500, the judge said, closing the file with a snap that sounded like a pistol shot. I nodded slowly, letting the weight of the evidence crush the air out of the room. "So we have a mathematical impossibility, Your Honor." I held up my hands, framing the dilemma. Either my parents are telling the truth today, and they do indeed have $2 million in cash. If that is the case, then they committed federal bankruptcy fraud 6 months ago by concealing assets from the United States trustee and their creditors. That is a felony punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison and a fine of up to $250,000. I took a step closer to the plaintiff table. My father looked as if he had stopped breathing. His face was a mask of gray ash. The greed that had been in his eyes moments ago was replaced by the terrifying realization that he had walked into a trap of his own making. Or I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. "The money never existed. Which means the testimony we heard this morning regarding the brown bag, the cash count, and the promise I made is a lie. Which means the affidavit signed by Mr. Henderson is perjury. Which means this entire lawsuit is a criminal conspiracy to defraud this court and extort me." I looked at Chad. He was no longer the smug businessman. He was trembling. It started in his hands and spread to his shoulders, a visible, uncontrollable shake that rattled the water glass on the table in front of him. He was looking at the exit sign, like a trapped animal calculating the distance to the door. So I asked the court, I said, turning back to the judge. Which felony would the plaintiffs like to admit to? Did they defraud the federal government to wipe out their debt? Or are they trying to defraud this court to steal my home? Because they cannot be innocent of both. The silence that followed was absolute. My mother let out a small, strangled sob, burying her face in her hands. My lawyer, Mr. Sterling, who had been so confident during his opening statement, was now furiously packing his briefcase, distancing himself physically from his clients, as if they were contagious. Judge Vance looked at my parents. It was a look of pure, unadulterated fury. He picked up his gavel, but he did not bang it. He held it like a weapon. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, his voice dangerously low. I suggest you advise your clients of their Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination immediately. Because based on the documents before me, I am about to make a referral that will ensure they do not leave this building without an escort. But the bankruptcy fraud is only half the story, Your Honor. While my parents are certainly guilty of lying to the federal government, they were motivated by a desperation that was not their own. They were manipulated by a man sitting right there at the plaintiff table. A man who needed a $6 million asset not for family stability but to save his own life. I turned my gaze to Chad. He was no longer looking for an exit. He was staring at the table, his face pale and sweating. He knew what was coming next. He knew that I knew. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a small black flash drive. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit C. This is a forensic financial report detailing the debts of Mr. Chad Miller. Specifically, it details a $250,000 debt owed to an unregulated private lending entity controlled by a man named Silas Vance. A debt that is due in full today at noon. Mr. Sterling shot up from his chair. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. My client's personal finances have nothing to do with the ownership of the house. It has everything to do with it, Judge Vance barked. Overruled. Continue, Ms. Brooks. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. I plugged the drive into the courtroom's presentation system. The motive for this entire lawsuit for the eviction for the rush to transfer the deed was never about providing a home for my sister. It was about collateral. Mr. Miller intends to use my property to secure a hard money loan to pay off his gambling debts. And if the court has any doubts about his intentions, I have one final piece of evidence. I pressed the play button on the laptop. The audio was crystal clear. It had been recorded by my private investigator 3 days ago in the parking lot of a bowling alley. First came the sound of a lighter flicking. Then Chad's voice, unmistakable and arrogant, filled the silent courtroom. Relax, Silas. I told you I have it under control. The court date is Monday. The judge is an old family values type. He will hand me the deed by lunch. A deeper, rougher voice answered. You better hope so, Chad. Because if I do not have my money by Friday noon, you are going to wish you were in prison. Chad's laugh echoed through the speakers. It was a cruel, dismissive sound. Do not worry about it. My stupid sister-in-law has no idea what is hitting her. She thinks this is about family. She is soft. Once I get the title, I am flipping the house immediately. I already have a buyer lined up for a quick cash sale. I will pay you your money, and I will still have enough left over to buy a new boat. The old people will never know the difference. I stopped the recording. The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens after a bomb goes off before the screaming starts. I looked at my parents. My mother was staring at Chad, her mouth slightly open. The look on her face was not anger. It was the look of someone watching their entire reality shatter. She had believed him. She had believed he was the golden son-in-law. She had destroyed her relationship with her own daughter because he told her it was for the good of the family. And now she had just heard him call her stupid. She had heard him plan to sell the house she thought was their legacy. My father turned to Chad slowly. You were going to sell it, he whispered. You told us we were going to live there. You told us it was for the grandchildren. Chad did not answer. He was staring at his hands, his breathing shallow and rapid. I turned back to the judge. Mr. Miller did not want a home, Your Honor. He wanted a liquid asset. He manipulated two elderly people into committing perjury and bankruptcy fraud so he could pay a loan shark. He has wasted this court's time. He has destroyed a family, and he has done it all while standing under oath. Judge Vance stared at Chad. The judge's face was red with suppressed rage. He had been used. His courtroom had been used as a pawn in a criminal scheme. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 11:45. Mr. Sterling, the judge, said, his voice surprisingly soft but possessing an edge of steel. I am revoking your client's bail on the outstanding traffic warrants that just popped up on my screen. But more importantly, I am holding him in direct contempt of court for the perjury we witnessed this morning. Chad stood up, knocking his chair over. Your Honor, please let me explain. It was just talk. I was just trying to buy time. Sit down, Mr. Miller, the judge roared. Chad looked at the door. I saw his muscles tense. He was going to run. He had to run. Silas was waiting and prison was waiting and he had nowhere left to go. Judge Vance saw it too. He raised his gavel and slammed it down with a force that made everyone jump. Marshals, the judge shouted, pointing a finger at the exits. Lock the doors. Secure this courtroom immediately. Nobody leaves this building. The sound of the heavy oak doors locking echoed through the courtroom like the final seal on a tomb. For a moment, nobody moved. The air was thick with the dust of destroyed lives. Judge Vance did not look at the papers in front of him anymore. He looked down at the people who had treated his courtroom like a casino trying to gamble with justice. Mr. Sterling, the plaintiff attorney, had backed away from the table entirely, leaving a physical gap between himself and the disaster he had been representing. Chad was shaking so hard his chair rattled against the floor. My parents sat frozen, their eyes wide and unseeing, unable to comprehend that the script had flipped so violently. The judge leaned into the microphone. His voice was not loud, but it carried the terrifying weight of absolute authority. Based on the overwhelming evidence of fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy presented by the defense, this court hereby dismisses the plaintiff's case with prejudice. The title to the Malibu property remains solely and exclusively with Ms. Nia Brooks. The temporary restraining order against the plaintiffs entering the property is made permanent, effective immediately. He paused and turned his gaze to the court-marshals standing by the doors. Furthermore, regarding Mr. Chad Miller, you are hereby remanded into custody immediately. The court finds probable cause for charges of first-degree perjury, attempted grand larceny, and fraud upon the court. No! Chad screamed, jumping up from his chair. No, you cannot do this. I have a deal. I need to make a call. Let me make a call. Two marshals moved in fast. They did not run. They moved with the heavy, efficient speed of men who handled desperate criminals every day. One of them grabbed Chad's arm, twisting it behind his back. The other kicked his legs apart. I watched as my arrogant brother-in-law, the man who had mocked me at the diner, the man who had laughed about selling my home, was slammed face first onto the defense table. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. Please, Chad sobbed, his face pressed against the wood. Elijah, tell them. Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you gave me the cash. Do not let them take me. My father did not speak. He was staring at the handcuffs on Chad's wrists, and I could see the terrifying realization dawning on him. The bankruptcy fraud. The fake ledger. He was next. The marshals were not just coming for Chad. The referral to the district attorney included everyone. As the officers hauled Chad upright, dragging him toward the side door leading to the holding cells, the spell broke for my parents. The reality of their situation crashed down on them. They were about to lose everything: their reputation, their freedom, their golden boy. My mother let out a wail that sounded more like a wounded animal than a human being. She scrambled up from her chair, knocking it over in her haste. She did not run to Chad. She ran to me. Nia, she screamed, reaching over the barrier that separated the tables. Nia, baby, please, stop them. You have to stop them. I stood up slowly, gathering my files. I did not look at the marshals dragging a screaming Chad out of the room. I looked at the woman who had destroyed my childhood photos 2 days ago. Nia, listen to me, my father stammered, stumbling up beside her. His face was gray and sweating. We did not know. We did not know he was gambling. He told us it was an investment. He told us he was protecting the family assets. We were tricked, my mother cried, grabbing the sleeve of my jacket. Her grip was desperate, terrified. He lied to us, Nia. He manipulated us. You heard the recording. He called us old and stupid. We are victims too. You have to help us. You have the best lawyers. Tell the judge to drop the referral. Please, baby. We are your parents. I looked down at her hand, clutching my expensive navy suit. The same hand that had slapped me when I refused to sign over the deed. The same hand that had signed a false affidavit to send me to prison. I carefully peeled her fingers off my arm one by one. I did not shove her. I simply removed her touch as if it were something dirty. I picked up my briefcase and stepped back, creating a distance that felt like miles. You were not tricked, I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through her sobbing. I looked at my father, who was shaking his head, tears streaming down his face. You knew exactly what you were doing. I continued, looking them dead in the eye. You knew you did not give me $2 million. You knew that ledger was fake. You knew you were lying to the court. You were perfectly happy to commit a felony when you thought it would make you rich. You were perfectly happy to watch me go to jail when you thought you would get my house. Nia, no. My mother begged, reaching for me again. We love you. I stepped out of reach. You did not do this because you were confused, I said, delivering the final verdict. And you did not do it because you loved Bianca. You did it because you saw a pile of money and you wanted it. You did not get played, Mom. You just made a bet and you lost. I turned my back on them. Bailiff, I said to the officer standing nearby, please keep the defendants away from me. I am leaving now. Nia, come back! My father shouted, his voice cracking. You cannot leave us here. We will go to prison, Nia. We will die in there. I walked toward the heavy oak doors, the clicking of my heels on the floor the only sound in the room. I did not look back. I did not feel guilt. I felt the immense lightness of a burden finally being set down. You are not victims, I whispered to myself as I pushed the doors open, walking out into the bright hallway. You are just accomplices who got caught. This journey taught me that sharing DNA does not guarantee loyalty or love. For years I believed that being a good daughter meant enduring abuse and financing their mistakes, but standing in that courtroom, I realized that true family is built on respect, not obligation. Walking away was not an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to keep themselves afloat. Sometimes the most expensive thing you will ever pay for is your own peace, but trust me, it is worth every single penny. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience and justice. Have you ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to save yourself? Share your experience in the comments below.